So thank you so much everyone for joining in. And just to give an introduction from my side, so this is Akhilesh and I head the privacy at Tsaaro. I have more than a decade of experience in the industry, varying from IT services, banking, now into risk consulting and privacy. I have implemented privacy across multiple organizations in various laws like GDPR, Singapore PDPA, PDPL, and multiple laws that are there in US, right? I am CIPPE, CIPT, and a certified data protection officer. So I have the academics as well as the qualifications, and I've implemented cookie solutions across multiple clients. And along with me, I also have Rahul Sharma, who will be leading us and helping us to understand more about cookies. Over to you, Rahul, for a quick intro.
Sure. Thanks, Akhilesh. Thanks, Tsaaro and Exterro for having me. I'm Rahul Sharma. I have over 12 years of experience in information security and data protection space, working in various organizations with different roles. So I've had the opportunity to work with the Data Security Council of India, International Association of Privacy Associations, IAPP, heading their India operations, and now running my own organization called Perspective and Grades. And I also double up as an advisor, as a senior privacy advisor for Exterro. And glad to be on this and look forward to discussing the cookies session.
Thank you so much. So today's session is jointly hosted by Tsaaro Consulting and Exterro. Before we get started, I also have Ashavari, who is a senior consultant with Tsaaro, and she has the experience of working on multiple tools to implement the cookies. So that is why I asked her to join this session to share her valuable insights. Right. So I'll quickly introduce Tsaaro Consulting and Exterro. Right. So Tsaaro is a leading privacy and security services firm. We have help organizations to comply with the privacy requirements of the multiple laws, as well as we partner with Exterro. Exterro is a value-added partner. Jointly together, we help the clients to solve the privacy problems. So they come up with the tool experience and they have the great tool that can help to comply with the regulatory requirements. So specifically designed for the privacy as well as the e-discovery, right? So that's where we come together. We help the client holistically to understand the privacy problems and to solve them. Today's session is around the cookies. Cookies have become an important aspect as you browse, right? For example, today I visit a website for the first time. Automatically, websites has a curiosity to understand more about its user. So they place a small text file on your device to understand who the user is, right? So what does basically the cookies do is they try to gather information around your web history, what kind of browsing habits you have, what are your preferences, like whether, for example, I'm shopping on the website, right? And I'm browsing for a shirt, and they want to know which preference I have, whether it's a formal or a casual, which color I want to purchase it, what are the websites I can go, right? Whether I'm visiting Mintra, whether I'm visiting an Soli website, or I'm visiting an Amazon to buy the shirt, right? The websites are curious enough to try to understand which one they want to try, right? So that places small text files on your devices to understand. So most of, if you visit any kind of websites, right? Sometimes you get up a small pop-up box saying that, are you okay for this information to be collected, right? But sometimes we don't even have it. There will be simple banner saying that for our business legitimate reasons, we might place those cookies to understand more about the user, right? Both the ways, because there is no act previously that governs all these aspects. That is, we don't have any laws as such right now, but GDPR is very stringent around it, right? If you don't take an opt-in consent, you might be penalized for that. And there are websites that have been done, right? There is a very popular website called None of Your Business. They typically go through your websites. If you're not complying, they might raise an issue with the supervisory authority. And cookies, even though they're small text files, over a period of time, they can gather large volumes of information and which can result in profiling of the user, right? So one of the biggest problems is over a period of time, they can create an accurate profile and that can result in certain issues like my privacy being violated. That is the reason we need to understand what are cookies and how do we deal with them, what are the different types of cookies that are there, and as in what is the solution the organizations have to better manage, right? If it's done in the proper manner, then that will be beneficial to both the customer. I can find my right shirt that I'm looking for, as well as for the organization, they can find the right customer. But if it's not done properly, it can result in violations, which can result in penalties from the supervisory authorities. So, what are the different types of cookies? So, Rahul, can you help us to understand what are the different types of cookies that are there?
As you rightly pointed out, how cookies becomes an overlooked aspect when it comes to understanding and implementation of data protection laws. GDPR and specifically Privacy Directive, specific acts in different countries try to address them because they understood the challenges of how cookies plays an important role in a user and an organization interaction. Because most of the times it is through a web interface that the user interacts with an organization, either it's through a website or a platform or any other means. And cookies are meant to sort of serve as a very important aspect that they sit in the middle, that they provide certain functionalities that are necessary to run the websites for page navigations, for maintaining sessions, for securing access to certain areas of websites. And so I think most of the times, I think organizations still continue to use HTTP cookies, but now with the advent of regulations, they have been categorized into multiple different types. Some are essential for maintaining session cookies, as you see on the slide, and persistent cookies are used for specifically remembering user preferences over time. For example, when you choose a language or anything, or you're like, these are also called preferences cookies. First party cookies are something which are directly placed by the website that you are visiting. But the most important challenging aspect and on which there was a lot of focus was on the third party cookies. Now, it's not that the first party cookies are ubiquitous and you just visit a website and company can paste whatever they want. I think if you remember in 2021, the French Data Protection Authority, CNIL, had fined Bing, Microsoft, about 63 million US dollars because it placed cookies on the user's browser and collected data for sharing with the third party ad providers without their consent. It's not a small offense. You look at the amount of fine, $63 million that Bing had to pay. So yeah, Akhilesh, over to you.
Thanks, Rahul. Thank you so much for explaining what are the different types of cookies. Especially, it's very important to understand the first party cookies and the third party cookies, right? If you look at who
Yeah,
is the actual cookies, who is placing those cookies? Is it the website themselves or someone else on behalf of the website, like Google or LinkedIn cookies or Facebook cookies, to try and understand the user, who is the owner of the cookies? And if the data is collected, who is your controller? Is it the website or the third party that is placing the cookies? So that differentiation as a user or your website owner, you need to understand to whom the accountability falls with. Now, the main question comes in, does any regulation in India require governs the cookies and how the consent is being managed by that? So, Rahul, if you can help us to understand.
as far as I know, I don't think there are any specific regulations per se on what kind of cookies can be placed, what are the kind of cookies for which consent has to be absolutely mandatory to collect and process, etc. Even the Information Technology Act did not talk about it specifically. However, now since we have a new law, Digital Personal Data Protection Act, in place, it also does not include anything specific about cookies, but it does require organizations to take consent before processing certain kind of information, certain kind of personal information. And I think through cookies also you get certain kind of personal information. So getting consent is important. Now, what is necessary, what can be done without consent, what can be done with consent, we'll have to wait for specific rules to come out under the DPDPA by the nodal ministry, and then we'll have more clarity. It also tries to introduce this concept of consent manager. I am not particularly sure if there is an interface between how a user manages cookies and the role of platforms and intermediaries like consent manager will have to play. But again, like that's to be seen on how that plays out. So as of now, we don't have anything specific yet, but consent requirement for information processing is a must. It should be unambiguous, clear, unconditional, and like some other criteria are added to it. So we'll have to sort of wait and see on how that shapes up.
very similar view, right? So DPDP is not specifically calling out around the consent for the cookies, but however,
Yeah.
if you look at the IT Act and the other places, and if you combine them together, cookies do fall under the personal data. And basis of that, if you're processing it, we have only two bases for processing. One is the consent, and the other is the legitimate users. And cookies being personal data of a choice, and ideally they should be taken under the consent. So cookies would be regulated by the requirements of the DPDPA to provide a privacy notice. We might require to take a consent. Even from the general practices, like from the taking it from the GDPR or other places, right? So cookies do require consent. So I just wanted to come back to you, right? What do you think? Which cookies and where we need to take consent for that?
So yes, there are certain kind of cookies that are absolutely necessary for operations and running of a website or a platform, for which I don't think you require consent because that is also not collecting personal information except some user ID or session ID. But for all other purposes, which are not categorized in as necessary and whose processing is not based under the Article 6(1)(f), for example, like preferences, marketing, or any other thing. So that has to be processed under Article 6(1)(a) of the GDPR. And coming back to this point on legitimate use, it's a very narrowly tailored definition of what is legitimate use under the DPDPA. It does not include reasonable purpose or legitimate interest, which you typically find in US and EU type legislations for information processing beyond consent. So there has to be some clarification on how certain kind of information, including some cookies information processing, has to happen. What is the purpose that is being accorded by the organizations when it comes to information processing? Consent for sure, yes, but legitimate uses maybe will have to be slightly expanded to include certain forms of legitimate interest that can be defined later on. But as of now, we have nothing on this.
Right, that's true. So how does the cookie consent work? Well, what do you?
I mean, when you visit a website, you can try visiting any website which has some affiliation to the EU. You will see, as in the left-hand side of the screens, there are certain uh, criteria which are mentioned. So first is, let's say, necessary cookies is absolutely essential and fundamental to the working on websites. Website typically can't function without them, although this might slightly vary on a case-to-case basis. But yes, this is widely understood as industry standard on that you need certain kind of cookies to enhance user experience. Else, without cookies, it will be too much time-consuming and labor-intensive work for users, which may destroy the experience of visiting the website. There is an argument that clicking on I agree, selecting preferences anyways kills that experience, but that is a different story. Second is your preference cookies, which allows website to remember information that changes the way website behaves and looks, like your preferred language or the region that you are accessing the website from. Third, it could be statistic cookies to help the website owners understand how these visitors interact with the web page, with the site itself, by collecting and reporting information, typically anonymously, because like you stats, you don't give personal information. However, if organizations tag that with specific user ID or specific sessions, then it becomes a PIN. And marketing cookies are typically used to track visitors across websites, with an intent to display ads that are relevant, engaging based on your past experience or your search or any other things, that keeps sort of a recursive track on what your preferences are, what are you actually looking for, and thereby it becomes more valuable for the publisher and third-party advertisers that this is where the actual money is. Sometimes there also will be some cross-domain consent that you're required to give to companies, because when you give them consent, it transfers that to not just the domain that you're visiting, but also the subdomains, etc., that can be placed by the website. So yeah, so like these are the typical form of cookies in the DPDP and also in the data protection laws. You are typically required to give affirmative consent, which is clear, unambiguous, unconditional, etc. And there has to be an option for the user to opt out of consent. That is typically for information processing by the organization, but also specifically for cookies. There are websites which give you the options of your cookie preferences, where you can select, where you can keep a track record of what are your existing preferences. If you want to modify anything, so yeah, everything is available under a dashboard. And if the user does not consent to anything, typically the organizations has a right to deny you certain services.
Exactly. So whenever we are talking about cookie consent, typically we are looking at a positive action from the user. But however, there are legitimate users for which we can collect the data typically under the US regulations, right? If you look at CCPA, the user we can ask for an opt-out consent instead of an opt-in consent. So it varies from the country to country where you are, the website is located, and who are your target audience. However, if you look at the best practices that we recommend, it's always an opt-in consent because the user has a clear choice in here whether that he wants the data to be processed or not, right? She's agreeing with them for the marketing information or analytics or statistical information, right? So based on that, we need to allow them opt-in or opt-out depending upon the regulation. And that is where the tools also come into place, right? Because every jurisdiction, the requirement varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. If we have a tool, so we can customize our preferences based on the jurisdiction. So user coming from US, I can automatically make it an opt-in. And for the users coming from Europe, I can modify the settings to opt-in and for US opt-out, right? So that can be easily done using the tools. And that's where the tools, the languages, but one of the important requirement that comes under the DPDPA is the notice requirement. And the notice should be available in the as per the language schedule that is provided in our constitution, the 22 languages, right? So whenever you are taking a consent as the legal basis, the notice should also be available in a language that can be understood by the user. So that is again a requirement. So this kind of translations cannot be done manually. So that is where I would highly prefer a tool to do that for me so that it can ease my compliance requirement. So whenever we are collecting the information from the data subject, right, or the data principal in the case of DPDPA, we need to take the consent in such a way that it is freely given from the user by user taking a positive affirmative action under the DPDPA, right? And the data fiduciary has to maintain this consent. However, there is an important differentiation from the GDPR is we have a concept called consent manager. So there can be a third party, either an individual or an organization who can become a consent manager to maintain all these consents. So for if you're having a website and a consent manager will be coming in place, so they might be responsible for maintaining the consent. So it becomes easy for the principal to come and withdraw their consent or come and modify their consents because for a consent to be freely given, we should also provide them withdrawal of consent. So all the consent that we are taking should be unconditional and unambiguous, right? So one, it should not come up with any conditions unless you give me consent, I'll not provide you discount, right? Unless you give me consent, I'm not going to process, like I'm not going to provide you certain information, right? So we cannot make it a conditional and make it in consent, right? It has to be freely given by the user, and it has to be transparent what we are doing with the data, right? So the user should clearly understand what we are doing with the data and should become only when he or she is comfortable, then only they'll be providing the consent. So require the cookie
Yeah.
notice. Yes, Rahul.
Right now, the cookies interface and management might be simple: accept or select your preferences, save and move on. However, as we try and get ahead, you might see interfaces and platforms where the information processing is done in various layers or like stages. I'm not typically sure on how that interfaces with the requirement of an unconditional thing, because, but if you were to access certain services which require specific consent that the website might require you to give. So that means that it could be based on certain conditions. So for general users, you might have typical user experience, but if you require certain specific access, certain discounts, as you mentioned, you might be required to give certain extra consent for that particular feature or service. I think that could also be something that, like, many companies are already experimenting with this kind of stuff. But yes, how will the regulation specifically tackle with it is like we have to see.
That's right, Rahul. Thank you so much for the input, Rahul. So even the DPDPA still we are waiting for certain guidelines to release in, but some of the aspects we can help you to understand coming from the industry best practices, and that will help you to understand more. Right. So when we are maintaining the consent, it's obviously the user has the preference management, right? For example, today I'm okay with the analytics, but tomorrow I might not be okay with the analytics. So how do we deal with that? So Rahul, if you can share your input, like how the preference management has to happen and how the user can update his preferences.
You know, organizations typically take use of consent management platforms to do this. There are various tools and solutions available. Organizations also try and build that as part of their website functionality. Within the same web page or website, they provide you with a link that you can be redirected to, where you can update your preferences with respect to cookies that are being served to you, that are no longer acceptable to you, and they provide you details on what kind of data is being collected. So as we discussed, like some are typically the HTTP cookies, some are the HTML local storage cookies, some are the pixel tracker cookies, typically used by uh, search engines and Google AdWords, and some are the for the indexing of database cookies, typically used by websites like YouTube. So all these different, and like there are more categories that are typically used by any website for providing you certain services. So you can imagine, if you look at how complex the ecosystem is, because the entire internet works on collecting personal information based on advertisements, etc. That's the underpinning of the entire internet model, the HTTP and the World Wide Web system. And yes, individuals should have the ability to opt in and out of data collection and processing activities. I think that's much required. I think one thing
Right.
that we should also discuss here in the on the aspect of data minimization, which is processing information which is only necessary for the purpose of processing. How is that to be determined will depend on case to case basis if there are any legal lawsuits. But if organizations are, let's say, trying and collect more information, even with the help of cookies, then they will have to provide a legal justification in case there is a complaint to the Data Protection Board or a lawsuit filed on why certain information was being collected, which was beyond the purpose required for processing. And this will also distill down to cookies. I don't think it is only for the large scale organization processing of personal information, sensitive information processing. It will eventually also come down to cookies. Maybe not immediately, but yes, going forward for sure.
Right,
Yes, of
Rahul.
course.
But as we get more information, we might get much more understanding on the granularity requirements. But if you just sum it up, whatever you said, right, consent management is important, and there should be an option for the user to maintain his consent. Like if, for example, he wants to withdraw the consent or change the consent preferences, he should be able to do that. So the granular consent on what data is being shared and what data he or she does not want to be shared, right, should has to be controlled. And the opt-out mechanism. So when we send a marketing email or something, and he wants to withdraw, he or she should have the ability to withdraw that. So the data principal should be equipped with the power to withdraw and manage his or her consent.
And yes, and non-repudiation, like the organizations have to demonstrate whatever user preferences have been recorded are sacrosanct, not changed.
And what are the features of the cookie consent platforms? You would have seen several cookie consent management platforms, your own. So what do you think are the features that should be there in the consent management platform?
Like as your slide appropriately covers, the role of cookies to for providing services is very clear, whether it is essential, necessary, preferential, statistical, marketing, or you're using cross-domain. The platforms, the consent manager, the cookie management platforms, it allows user to have a dashboard and view whatever cookies are being presented to them or her. A typical user might not spend too much time because our primary purpose is on visiting the website and getting the information that we want, not visiting the website and managing all the cookies, just spending 10 minutes and then going ahead with the requirements. But I think when we try and use certain websites and we simply see the button on minimum, like privacy respecting settings of cookie preference settings, we just click on that, or we simply click on deny all except necessaries and move on. I think that becomes the de facto use case for cookies, unless there is an incentive for others to do something else. And as like in the previous slides, we discussed on where various kind of cookies which help organizations provide various functionalities, provide more users, provide and learn about better statistics, serve targeted advertisements to users, etc. So that becomes very important. Specifically for children, the serving profiling user behavior and serving targeted advertisements, it's a strict no-no unless there is a specific notification that exempts you. All those things have also to be built in the organization's website. On the modalities, on whether the website is specifically directed for children or not, and how do you differentiate, etc., that will come through rules as we move forward. But again, like that's also a point to consider when you are designing or maintaining your websites. And in the last slide, which you were mentioning about how do we maintain those preferences stored with respect to the future visits, you can carry on from wherever you left through the help of sessions or other persistent cookies that help you maintain certain preferences. So I think these are typically the functions with which the content management platforms provide you a solution to the user on how they can use it. And more
Right.
importantly, the third party part, because this is where the actual game is. So we saw a lot of news items related to Apple and Google trying to replace third party cookies, and they came up with very innovative solutions that I think we also discovered in the previous webinar on contextual targeting, use of device graph, or simply like a privacy sandbox. So
Right.
these things are getting more innovative on how information with respect to third-party cookies is going to be processed and help both the organization use certain information while helping the user maintain their privacy by not allowing more information than required to be passed on to the other players for process.
Right, exactly. So with the platforms, it becomes things become easier, right? For example, the consent banner customization, the language modification, right? So that user coming from different locations can easily have their language being available, and that makes the user understanding,
Mhm.
right? So that also fulfills our transparency requirement. And since we can do a cookie audit, right, that will help us with the cookie categorization. So what are the things that you do, right? So the first step, whenever you want to comply with the DPDPA requirements or any regulatory requirements, the first step, do a cookie audit, understand what are the different types of cookies that you're being placing, right? So what happens is that the IT team might have a different requirement, the marketing team might have a different requirement, and according to that, they might have placed different cookies. We might not know exactly all the cookies. So by doing the cookie audit, you understand all the cookies that are used on the website, their purposes, and their source. Is it a first party or a third party? As I told, who is the owner of these cookies? Is it something that is being owned by the third party or just a processor? Or are you the controller, right? And once we have the cookies, create a transparent notice so that the users can understand what are the types of cookies that are placed and what is the information that is being collected. So in order to provide granular control to the user, we need to do the cookie consent management platform so that the user can modify his preferences as and when required. Regularly review and update your cookie practices so that if there is any new cookies that are being placed from the third parties or from the ITT, you are aware and you are updating them, right? So by having the third party platforms, the CMPs of cookie management platforms, you can enhance your customer trust because of the categorization available and the language, the options to withdraw the consent, and it also eases your compliance requirement. You can comply with GDPR, CCPA, LGPD, name any regulation. You have the option to customize your banner for that particular regulation, and you would be able to comply with that. And since by having the right banner, the branding, and everything, it can also increase the trust, which can in turn lead to increase in sales, right? And the marketing team will have better data because the data is obtained through consent and the data is up to date. We can use them to get better analytics and better sales targets. And the best important thing is the compliance with the regulatory requirements, and we can avoid all the penalties. So thank you so much. This is what we wanted to convey, how the CMPs can help you to comply with the cookies. Hope you understand what are cookies and what do they do, what are the different types of cookies, and what are your compliance requirements, right? We have also have a white paper we have posted in the chat. So download them and have a look at them. So that will help you to understand more around cookies. And if you have any questions around the cookies, right, you can reach out to us and we'll be more than happy to help you. Thank you so much, everyone. And this session was jointly presented by Tsaaro Consulting and Exterro, and we can help you to solve the problems of your privacy requirements.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you,
so much.
everyone.